George Clooney just humiliated Prince Harry on national TV, calling him out with a brutal truth the royals hoped you'd never hear. In a jaw-dropping moment on Late Night with Seth Meyers, Hollywood icon George Clooney took direct aim at Prince Harry, mocking his alleged demand to still be addressed as royalty. With laughter echoing through the studio, Clooney didn't hold back, saying bluntly, "You're not royalty anymore." But what started as a joke quickly spiraled into a deeper scandal, raising questions about Harry's status, his ego, and how far he'll go to cling to royal privilege. What really happened behind the scenes before that taping? Why is this moment triggering such intense backlash from inside the palace? And what does it reveal about Harry's desperation and his growing isolation from both Hollywood and the monarchy? Stay tuned. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Under the dazzling lights of late-night television, a moment unfolded that no one saw coming, least of all, Prince Harry himself. It wasn't a royal engagement or an official statement from Buckingham Palace that grabbed headlines this time. It was a sharp, unsparing joke delivered with perfect comedic timing by none other than Hollywood legend George Clooney. The stage? Late Night with Seth Meyers. The target? Prince Harry's alleged insistence on still being addressed as royalty, despite having stepped away from his official royal duties years ago. It began as a seemingly innocuous segment, the kind of celebrity banter late-night shows are known for. Seth Meyers, a seasoned host with a knack for balancing wit and provocation, had invited George Clooney for what fans expected to be a promotional appearance for his latest film project. But Clooney, ever the showman, had other plans. As the conversation veered toward recent headlines involving the British monarchy, Meyers nudged the topic gently toward Prince Harry's ongoing efforts to carve out a public identity independent of the royal family. That's when Clooney pounced. "You know," Clooney said with that signature smirk that has charmed audiences for decades, "I love Harry. I really do. Great guy. But you don't get to quit your job and still insist everyone calls you a manager, right?" Laughter erupted from the audience. Clooney paused for effect, then added, "You're not royalty anymore, buddy. You're just a guy with a Netflix deal and a podcast." The room exploded. The audience roared. Meyers clutched his desk, clearly amused, and struggled to get a word in. But the message had landed, direct, humorous, and searing. For many viewers, it was a moment of clarity cloaked in comedy. It encapsulated what a large segment of the public had been murmuring for some time. Can you really walk away from the most ancient and rigid institution in the Western world and still lay claim to the gravitas it confers? But what prompted Clooney to say what he did? Was it just a quip crafted for late-night laughs, or was it something deeper? A sentiment shared quietly among elites who have grown weary of the endless contradiction between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's claims of desiring privacy and their continual media engagements? Was it a critique cloaked in comedy, signaling a broader cultural shift in how we perceive royalty in the modern era? To understand the magnitude of this moment, we must revisit the winding road that brought Prince Harry from royal palaces to Hollywood couches. His departure from senior royal duties in early 2020, often dubbed Megxit by the tabloids, sent shockwaves through the United Kingdom and reverberated globally. At the time, Harry and Meghan painted their departure as a necessity, a means of escaping the suffocating grasp of British tabloid culture and the rigidity of royal life. In public statements and explosive interviews, they detailed their grievances, lack of institutional support, concerns for mental health, and an overarching desire to protect their young family from the same media scrutiny that plagued Harry's mother, Princess Diana. But in the years that followed, the couple didn't retreat into obscurity. Quite the opposite. They became omnipresent. From multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify to headline-making interviews with Oprah Winfrey and appearances at global charity events, Harry and Meghan seemed to embrace the very spotlight they once claimed to flee. This dissonance wasn't lost on the public, especially in the UK, where traditional views on royalty remained deeply ingrained. The public began to question, were they witnessing a genuine bid for normalcy, or was it a calculated rebranding exercise disguised as personal liberation? Clooney's joke, while delivered with the levity of a seasoned entertainer, tapped into this wellspring of skepticism. The punchline, "You're not royalty anymore," didn't just land because it was funny. It resonated because it echoed an uncomfortable truth. Titles, status, and reverence must be earned or retained through consistent behavior. And in Harry's case, the behavior had not aligned with the tradition his title was rooted in. Clooney himself is no stranger to the royal couple. He and his wife, Amal Clooney, a renowned human rights lawyer, were among the select guests at Harry and Meghan's 2018 royal wedding. At the time, it seemed like a match made in media heaven, two global celebrities who could bring star power to an already iconic institution. The Clooneys represented a blend of Hollywood glamour and intellectual gravitas, while Harry and Meghan symbolized a new, modern face for the British monarchy. Their friendship appeared mutually beneficial. Yet, like many celebrity relationships, it may have soured quietly behind the scenes, leaving room for a joke that cut a little deeper than intended. It's worth noting that Clooney's comment wasn't made in a vacuum. The late-night stage has increasingly become a platform where serious social critiques are dressed in comedic robes. Audiences tune in for laughs, but stay for the truth bombs. From John Oliver's takedowns of political hypocrisy to Stephen Colbert's jabs at corporate greed, these shows operate as cultural mirrors, reflecting back to us the inconsistencies we often choose to overlook. In this case, the mirror was held up to Prince Harry's identity crisis, his inability to fully sever ties with the institution he abandoned, while still expecting the deference it once afforded him. What makes the moment even more gripping is the backdrop against which it occurred. Just days before Clooney's appearance, headlines had emerged suggesting Prince Harry was lobbying for certain formalities to be observed during public appearances, allegedly insisting on being referred to with royal honorifics or expecting ceremonial protocol to be followed at charity events. Whether these reports were exaggerated or not, they painted a picture of a man caught between worlds, no longer a working royal, but not quite a common citizen either. A prince without a palace, so to speak. And then, along came George Clooney with a single line that sliced through all the ambiguity. The fallout was swift. Social media platforms lit up with reactions. Hashtags like #NotRoyaltyAnymore and #Clooney said it trended for hours. Commentators praised Clooney's candor, while others accused him of being insensitive or opportunistic. Some royal watchers saw it as a moment of long-overdue reckoning, while supporters of the Sussexes decried it as a cheap shot aimed at a couple trying to reinvent themselves in a hostile media landscape. Still, the public discourse shifted noticeably. The joke forced people to confront the uncomfortable question: what, exactly, is Prince Harry now? Is he a royal figure deserving of formal respect? Or is he a private citizen leveraging his past for profit and prestige? The answer, it seems, depends largely on one's perspective. From a traditionalist viewpoint, titles and honors are inseparable from duty. If you step back from the responsibility, you relinquish the privilege. From a modern, celebrity-driven lens, however, identity is more fluid. Past associations and personal branding hold immense value regardless of current role or title. In this context, Harry's continued invocation of his royal background is not hypocrisy, but strategy. And in today's attention economy, visibility is everything. But regardless of where you fall on this spectrum, one thing is clear: George Clooney's roast was more than just a punchline. It was a cultural moment, a snapshot of the growing tension between legacy and reinvention, between tradition and relevance. It forced the world to take a long, hard look at how we treat royalty outside of its intended habitat, and how those who leave it behind choose to wield the power they once inherited. The middle of this saga, now unfolding in real time, is steeped in contradiction. Harry has insisted, time and again, that he left royal life behind for the sake of personal freedom. Yet, his actions suggest an ongoing struggle to separate who he was from who he wants to become. It's a tale of identity, public perception, and the limits of reinvention. And in one deft comedic moment, George Clooney captured that struggle more succinctly than any tabloid ever could. In the years following his seismic departure from the British royal family, Prince Harry has stood as one of the most complicated figures in the global spotlight. He embodies a unique paradox, born into the most rigid institution of Western tradition, yet increasingly aligning himself with the fluid, image-driven culture of American celebrity. This identity shift hasn't gone unnoticed, and it was precisely this complex metamorphosis that George Clooney's pointed joke illuminated on late-night television. For many observers, it didn't just mark a celebrity's playful roast. It marked the cracking of a carefully curated dual identity. But to truly understand why the joke resonated so deeply and struck a cultural nerve, we must first unpack the competing images that define Prince Harry today. Prince Harry was once the most beloved royal of his generation. The public adored the mischievous boy who walked behind his mother's coffin, the teenage rebel who seemed more accessible than the stoic Prince William, and later, the war veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan and sought to connect with wounded soldiers and veterans. He was hailed as the People's Prince, a title that suggested a rawness and relatability the royal institution rarely allowed. But that was before the documentaries, the memoir, the interviews, and the billion-dollar media deals. Before Harry began to regularly appear on red carpets and speaking panels alongside Silicon Valley moguls and Hollywood elites. Before he and Meghan released a 6-part Netflix documentary series chronicling their personal grievances with the royal family and the British press. Before Spare, the controversial memoir that detailed everything from royal spats to losing his virginity behind a pub. These weren't just moments of personal expression. They were definitive steps in a conscious rebranding process, shifting Prince Harry from a stately figurehead to a global content creator. That transformation comes with its own set of contradictions. A royal title carries the weight of history and dignity. Royals are expected to be silent on politics, restrained in their opinions, and reserved in public behavior. Their power lies in symbolism, not visibility. By contrast, a Hollywood celebrity thrives on exposure, reinvention, and relatability. They are expected to market themselves, share personal narratives, and court public engagement. Prince Harry, in stepping away from the palace and into the public sphere of American entertainment, attempted to bridge these two worlds. But instead of creating a harmonious hybrid identity, he has sparked confusion, criticism, and a growing sense of cultural fatigue. George Clooney's joke cut so effectively because it voiced what many had hesitated to articulate out loud. Prince Harry wants to have it both ways. He has stepped back from royal duties but retains the style, language, and prestige associated with royalty. He rejects the institution, but embraces the platform it gave him. He speaks against the tabloid press but collaborates with streaming giants to broadcast intimate details of his life. This contradiction is not only difficult for the public to digest, it has become a source of skepticism among even his most ardent defenders. A fundamental part of this tension is how Harry has chosen to monetize his experiences. The Spotify and Netflix deals, reportedly worth tens of millions of dollars, were predicated on Harry and Meghan's unique position in the world. They weren't just a couple with opinions, they were insiders who had defected from one of the most secretive institutions on Earth. Their stories, their insights, their behind-the-scenes knowledge had market value, and they were ready to sell it. The couple's narrative quickly centered on personal pain, institutional betrayal, and a quest for healing, all of which found resonance in America's therapeutic culture. But the deeper they waded into the commercial waters of their past, the more questions arose about their present integrity. Can you truly be a victim of the institution if you continue to profit from your association with it? Can you claim to want privacy and then publish a memoir that describes frostbite on your genitals and arguments about wedding dresses? For many, the answer is no. And the line Clooney delivered, about Harry being just a guy with a Netflix deal and a podcast, brutally underscored that disconnect. The American public has a high tolerance, even affection, for reinvention. Celebrities fall from grace and rise again every year. What they don't tolerate as easily is inauthenticity or what they perceive as a lack of self-awareness. Prince Harry and Meghan's public brand has flirted dangerously with this line. Their messaging, centered on empathy, truth, and social justice, has sometimes been undermined by luxurious Montecito homes, celebrity associations, and perceived hypocrisy. What's more, the claim to moral authority has sometimes been at odds with the very methods they've used to maintain their relevance. This contrast came into even sharper focus following the release of Spare. Far from being a dignified royal memoir, it read more like a tabloid confessional. While it certainly succeeded in making headlines, it also signaled a shift in tone. This was no longer the voice of a restrained, reflective duke. This was the voice of someone who had embraced a different kind of power, the power of celebrity candor. With each revelation came scrutiny, and with each personal anecdote, the image of royalty slipped further into the background. He wasn't Prince Harry anymore. He was Harry, the former royal turned Netflix narrator. And therein lies the crux of the identity dilemma. To the British public, and to many traditional royal watchers, royalty isn't a brand you can pick up and put down like a designer's suit. It's a life sentence, an all-encompassing identity that only death or disgrace can revoke. To walk away is to forfeit the reverence that comes with the role. But in America, especially in the entertainment industry, identity is fluid. You are what you say you are, as long as the public buys it. And for a while, they did buy it. The Sussexes were met with adulation, magazine covers, and accolades for daring to break away from the firm. But eventually, the novelty wore off. Their personal revelations began to feel repetitive. Their grievances lost the shock factor. Their branded activism started to look more like branding and less like activism. And as the content dried up, the contradictions became harder to ignore. This is where George Clooney's words resonated most. Clooney, an insider in Hollywood but also a figure with global gravitas, used his platform not to praise but to puncture. His jab wasn't just about Harry's title. It was about his perceived refusal to fully commit to either identity. It was a call-out disguised as comedy, a public shaming cloaked in a late-night joke. And it struck harder because it came from someone who was once an ally. In the wake of Clooney's remark, commentators on both sides of the Atlantic dissected its implications. Some defended Harry, arguing that his experiences gave him the right to use his story however he wished. Others viewed it as confirmation that even those in Hollywood had grown weary of the royal-turned-celebrity saga. The coverage reignited debates around authenticity, privilege, and the role of public figures in shaping their own narratives. In many ways, this moment could mark a turning point in Prince Harry's post-royal trajectory. The laughter from the late-night audience may have masked a deeper cultural shift, a signal that the world is ready to see Harry for who he is now, not who he once was. It suggests that the safety net of his royal past is wearing thin, and that continued success in the public eye will require more than nostalgia and name recognition. For Harry, the road ahead may demand a more honest reckoning with the identity he now embodies. Is he a thought leader, a media mogul, a social activist, or simply a man trying to navigate life after privilege, power, and pageantry? The world is watching, and increasingly, laughing, because the answer remains unclear. The illusion of being both a royal and a rebel is no longer holding up under scrutiny. The cracks are visible, and while Harry may have hoped to bridge these two worlds, the reality is proving far more complicated. What Clooney did, intentionally or not, was reveal the weakness in the bridge. Now the question becomes whether Harry will attempt to fortify it, or abandon it entirely in favor of a new path, one rooted not in legacy, but in genuine transformation. As the world watched the royal wedding unfold in May 2018, it seemed like a fairy tale had been scripted for the modern age. The charming and rebellious Prince Harry, long portrayed as the emotionally complex younger son of Princess Diana, was marrying Meghan Markle, an American actress, philanthropist, and divorcee of mixed race. For millions, it was more than just a wedding. It was a symbol of progress. Yet, beneath the dazzling tiaras, polished protocol, and historic resonance of Windsor Castle, subtle undercurrents were already shifting. Within the walls of the palace and beyond, Meghan Markle was not just entering the royal family, she was reshaping it. And through that reshaping, she began one of the most significant and controversial rebrandings in modern celebrity history, that of Prince Harry. Before Meghan, Prince Harry was many things: soldier, rogue, royal heartthrob, charitable ambassador. He was a man burdened by legacy, revered for his authenticity, and yet often dismissed for his lack of discipline. He struggled with the institutional expectations thrust upon him at birth, from the never-ending media scrutiny to the stifling demands of royal protocol. Yet for all his defiance, Harry still operated within the traditional machinery of the monarchy. He attended events in military regalia, stood dutifully behind his grandmother the Queen, and rarely spoke openly about the inner turmoil his life entailed. His was a life lived in a gilded cage, one he seemed resigned to accept, albeit with a few rebellious outbursts along the way. Enter Meghan. Meghan Markle represented a stark departure from everything the British monarchy had traditionally embraced. She was American, independent, opinionated, and experienced in navigating media on her own terms. She was also a product of the Hollywood entertainment industry, where personal narrative, branding, and strategic public relations are not just tools, they are lifelines. Where royal family members traditionally relied on silence and dignity, Meghan wielded voice and visibility. And when the two worlds collided, the transformation of Prince Harry began. Many observers have suggested that Meghan simply provided Harry with the courage to speak his truth. But that analysis falls short of capturing the layered and systematic way in which their union began to reshape his identity. The shift wasn't just emotional, it was tactical. Meghan brought with her not only a sense of purpose, but a toolkit. The ability to manage optics, control narrative, and construct a public persona designed for long-term relevance. Suddenly, Harry wasn't just a royal anymore. He was a brand with a story, a brand with a message, a brand with value. The turning point came swiftly. In early 2020, Harry and Meghan announced they would be stepping back from their roles as senior members of the royal family. The decision shocked the world and reportedly blindsided the palace. The Sussexes explained their choice as a move toward financial independence and a desire to escape the toxic scrutiny of the British press. But what unfolded afterward made clear that this exit was not merely a retreat, it was a pivot. Within months, the couple relocated to North America, settling in Montecito, California. There, they began laying the foundation for a multi-pronged media empire. Archwell, their nonprofit and production umbrella, was established, and lucrative partnerships with Spotify, Netflix, and Penguin Random House soon followed. These were not just business deals. They were strategic moves designed to monetize personal narrative, cultural influence, and global curiosity. And at the center of it all was Harry, not as the stoic royal, but as the emotionally candid survivor of an archaic institution, now repackaged as a thought leader, father, and mental health advocate. Meghan's influence on this transformation cannot be overstated. Her understanding of the power of story, from her time on the television show Suits to her lifestyle blog, The Tig, was instrumental in crafting a new version of Harry that the world had never seen before. In interviews, podcasts, and press releases, Harry began speaking more openly, more vulnerably, and with a distinctly American inflection. He was no longer simply reacting to the royal machinery. He was challenging it, deconstructing it, and offering an alternative worldview shaped by therapy, trauma, and self-liberation. This rebranding found its most potent expression in the infamous Oprah Winfrey interview. The 2-hour televised event reached millions and sent shockwaves through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. It was unprecedented. 2 former royals airing grievances on primetime television, detailing family rifts, emotional suffering, and alleged institutional indifference. Meghan's calm poise contrasted with Harry's restrained frustration, but the message was unified. They had broken free from an institution that failed them. And in doing so, they declared independence not just in lifestyle but in identity. Yet the same moment that elevated their global celebrity also revealed the fragility of their rebrand. For every person who applauded their courage, another questioned their motives. Critics noted the contradiction in denouncing royal privilege while continuing to use titles and lineage as social capital. Meghan and Harry claimed to want privacy, yet continually chose high-profile platforms to disseminate personal stories. The boundaries between authenticity and performance began to blur, and nowhere was this more evident than in how Harry himself was being publicly reimagined. For many, Harry had lost something essential in the process. The prince who once walked through minefields with landmine victims in Angola now seemed more concerned with brand alignment than boots-on-the-ground philanthropy. The soldier who spoke movingly about brotherhood and duty was now part of the American podcast circuit, discussing trauma in glossy soundbites and curated anecdotes. Meghan's influence may have freed him from royal obligations, but it also tethered him to the machinery of fame in a way that was entirely new and potentially even more confining. Even the platforms themselves revealed this shift. While Harry once operated under the restraint of palace communications and royal discretion, he now posted carefully scripted statements, appeared in professionally lit interviews, and participated in docuseries edited for emotional impact. The traditional dignity of royal communication, its solemnity, its subtlety, had given way to a visual and emotional economy rooted in engagement metrics and viral clips. Meghan's Hollywood fluency had injected vitality into their public image, but it also introduced a performative element that Harry had never fully embraced before. This raises a difficult question. Has Harry truly found his voice, or has he adopted a new script written for an American audience? Meghan's defenders would argue that she empowered Harry to evolve, to become the man his mother would have wanted him to be: open, empathetic, socially conscious. Her critics claim she exploited his vulnerabilities to pull him away from family, tradition, and national duty. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. What is certain, however, is that Harry's identity is now inseparable from Meghan's influence. They are not just partners in marriage, but co-authors of a shared narrative, architects of a joint rebranding project that relies on continuous public interest. As their projects unfold, from children's content to memoirs, from charity initiatives to entertainment ventures, the challenge remains consistency. Can they maintain moral authority while navigating commercial imperatives? Can Harry, in particular, preserve his legacy as a force for good while operating within a fame economy that rewards sensationalism over sincerity? Meghan, with her media instincts and articulate poise, may be better equipped for this terrain. But for Harry, whose life was shaped in the shadow of monarchy and media trauma, the constant exposure carries real risks. And herein lies the ultimate irony. In fleeing the royal spotlight to regain control, Harry has entered a world where the spotlight is even harsher and less forgiving. The British press may have been relentless, but it was bound by certain formalities and conventions. The American entertainment landscape, with its endless appetite for content and controversy, plays by a different set of rules. And the stakes are higher. Here, relevance is currency. Consistency is elusive. And the line between authenticity and performance is vanishingly thin. Meghan Markle's influence has undoubtedly expanded Harry's reach, amplified his message, and reshaped his identity for a global stage. She has introduced him to a new kind of power, one rooted not in bloodline but in narrative control. But with that power comes a price. Every appearance, every deal, every revelation chips away at the mystique that once made Harry an enigma. In its place is something more accessible, more relatable, and, for some, less inspiring. The transformation is complete, but the journey is far from over. Prince Harry is no longer merely a royal. He is a husband, father, advocate, and celebrity. But whether this new identity can withstand the scrutiny of both worlds, the crown he left behind and the spotlight he stepped into, remains to be seen. As the polished facade of the British royal family began to show cracks in public, perhaps nowhere was the rupture more painfully evident than in the once close bond between Prince William and Prince Harry. Born just over 2 years apart, the two princes shared an unbreakable brotherhood forged in privilege, pain, and a profound mutual understanding that only they could truly grasp. They had walked behind their mother's coffin together. They had braved the pressures of growing up under a microscope. They had been each other's shadows through royal tours, army deployments, and family events. But as Harry's path veered further from tradition and closer to Meghan Markle's world of autonomy and narrative control, the relationship between the brothers suffered seismic blows. At first, the changes in their bond were imperceptible. There were subtle indicators, missed glances, altered body language, slightly strained smiles at official engagements, but nothing definitive. Still, palace insiders noted growing tensions, especially in the run-up to Harry's marriage. William, ever cautious and steeped in royal duty, had allegedly warned Harry against rushing into marriage with Meghan. According to reports that have since been widely circulated and, in some cases, corroborated by Harry himself, William expressed concern that Harry wasn't giving himself or Meghan enough time to adjust to the unique pressures of royal life. Harry, sensitive and already protective of Meghan, perceived this as judgment, even condescension. The wedge had been driven. This was not merely a spat between siblings. It was the clash of two worldviews, one rooted in tradition, responsibility, and restraint, the other yearning for personal freedom, expression, and emotional transparency. William had been groomed since birth to become king. His entire life had been orchestrated by royal expectations and shaped by institutional purpose. In contrast, Harry, while equally cherished by the public, had always been seen as the spare, a supporting actor in a monarchical script centered on his older brother. When Harry began rewriting his own script, the very foundation of their fraternal dynamic started to crumble. The situation worsened when Meghan entered the family. While the public marveled at the diversity, glamour, and modernity she brought, tensions inside the palace escalated. Meghan's assertiveness, her refusal to conform to certain royal expectations, and her outspoken nature reportedly clashed with the more reserved ethos of the House of Windsor. William and Kate, by nature and training, were disciplined in their public demeanor. Meghan's more expressive American sensibility was viewed as disruptive by some royal courtiers. William, trying to balance the demands of monarchy with personal loyalty to his brother, found himself in an impossible position. What began as a quiet, cautionary conversation soon unraveled into a full-blown schism. the public began noticing the frost between the brothers at royal events. The once inseparable duo were no longer arriving together, laughing with shared inside jokes, or standing shoulder to shoulder with natural camaraderie. Instead, formal smiles masked obvious discomfort. There were stories of separate households being established, of differing communication strategies with the press, of tensions between their wives. What might have once been resolved with a frank conversation behind closed doors now spilled into media speculation and palace whispers. Then came the royal exit, dubbed Megxit, by the British press, and with it, a point of no return. When Harry and Meghan announced they were stepping back as senior royals, William was reportedly blindsided and deeply hurt. The announcement, posted without prior coordination with the rest of the family, stunned Buckingham Palace and sparked a period of internal crisis. William, by all accounts, felt betrayed, not only because of the lack of communication but because of the optics. Harry and Meghan's unilateral move challenged the monarchy's cohesion and, by extension, William's future role as king. The brothers were no longer merely at odds, they were on opposite sides of a rapidly escalating institutional divide. Following the split, the distance became geographical as well as emotional. Harry and Meghan relocated to North America. Their public statements began to reference lack of support, racism, and neglect within the royal institution. Though names were rarely mentioned, the implications hung in the air. Every interview, every podcast, and every Netflix appearance seemed to place further strain on the already fragile bond between Harry and William. Perhaps the most dramatic fracture came during the televised Oprah Winfrey interview in 2021. Among the many revelations made during the interview, one stood out in its emotional weight. Harry admitted that he and William were on different paths and that the relationship was one of space at that moment. He acknowledged the tension but stopped short of casting William as an antagonist. Meghan, however, described her isolation and pain in terms that, by implication, pointed fingers at the royal family's highest echelons. The public was left to read between the lines, and many interpreted the silence from William's camp as dignified restraint, while others saw it as tacit admission of guilt. The fallout was immediate. Commentators and citizens alike chose sides. For those who sympathized with Harry and Meghan, William represented the cold face of monarchy, emotionally unavailable, bound to an outdated system, and complicit through inaction. For monarchy loyalists, Harry was seen as a disloyal son who had allowed his personal grievances to undermine the dignity of the crown and cast a shadow over his brother's future reign. The battle lines were no longer just familial, they were ideological, generational, even geopolitical. In the years that followed, the two brothers saw each other only during major royal events, funerals, coronations, and memorials. At Prince Philip's funeral, cameras zoomed in on the brothers walking together briefly, offering a glimmer of reconciliation. But even that moment felt choreographed, temporary, and ultimately symbolic. The deeper wounds had not healed. Their interactions remained minimal, with William focusing increasingly on his duties and growing family, while Harry continued to speak out in interviews and memoirs. When Harry's autobiography, Spare, was released, any hopes of reconciliation dimmed further. In the book, Harry chronicled years of sibling rivalry, including alleged physical altercations with William, emotional abandonment, and simmering jealousy. William was painted as a man beholden to image, tradition, and a sometimes cruel establishment. The book did not just document personal history, it cemented a narrative. And once that narrative was out, there was no taking it back. To William, the release of Spare likely felt like the ultimate betrayal, a betrayal not only of trust but of brotherhood. Royal protocol has long dictated that family matters remain private. By airing grievances so publicly and so candidly, Harry had crossed an unwritten line. The relationship, already strained, became almost irreparable. Sources close to the royal household describe William as resigned but firm in his stance. He reportedly believes that Harry made his choice, and that choice came at a cost. Unlike the Queen, who valued unity above all, or King Charles, who seemed to vacillate between appeasement and frustration, William had hardened. As the future monarch, he understood the importance of stability. And in his view, Harry had to stabilize not just the family but the institution itself. Even attempts at healing have been marred by miscommunication and mistrust. When King Charles was diagnosed with cancer, there was a brief thaw. Harry flew to London, and the possibility of familial solidarity flickered. But no substantial meeting with William occurred. The brothers remained distant, both physically and emotionally. In the press, There were occasional stories of olive branches, but palace insiders indicated that any reconciliation would be a long, complex process fraught with conditions and cautions. For their part, Harry and Meghan have continued to redefine their roles outside of the monarchy. They have invested in media, philanthropy, and public discourse. Yet Harry's identity remains entangled with the family he left behind, and by extension, with the brother he no longer speaks to. Whether he admits it or not, his relationship with William continues to define much of his public narrative. And for William, the stakes are no less personal. He is not just dealing with a fractured sibling relationship, he is navigating a monarchy in transition. The estrangement from Harry is not a minor family quarrel. It is a symbol of the institution's internal struggle to adapt to a modern world. William must balance the personal pain of losing his brother with the public responsibility of embodying the future king. It is a role that demands grace, strength, and, increasingly, emotional detachment. This new reality, the estranged princes, divided by ideology, geography, and personal trauma, stands in stark contrast to the image the world once knew. Gone are the days of matching uniforms, rugby games, and shared laughter. In their place are silences, memoirs, and media narratives. The fracture is no longer hidden. It is part of the royal story. And in many ways, it encapsulates the challenge facing the monarchy itself: how to preserve tradition while confronting change, how to protect image while acknowledging pain, and how to stay united in a world that thrives on division. The breakdown of William and Harry's relationship is not just a personal tragedy, it is a symbol of a larger, more unsettling truth, that even the most sacred of bonds can be tested, and sometimes broken, by the weight of legacy and the pursuit of individuality. As the storm between Princes William and Harry gained strength, swirling into an uncontrollable cyclone of public statements, memoir confessions, and media wars, one figure stood eerily still amidst the chaos: King Charles III. The man who once was the Prince of Wales, long accused of being emotionally distant and reserved even with his closest family, seemed to withdraw further into silence during the unfolding saga between his sons. This absence of overt action or emotional display left a vacuum, one that whispered louder than any spoken word. For a father whose own life had been torn between duty and desire, the choice to remain silent became not just a personal defense mechanism, but a national point of scrutiny. Observers have noted that Charles, for all his public posturing as a modern and caring royal, has historically struggled with emotional transparency. Raised under the rigid tutelage of Queen Elizabeth II and the formidable presence of Prince Philip, Charles was a man trained to wear restraint like armor. Emotion, in his upbringing, was a private affair, something not to be paraded or indulged. And it was perhaps this very conditioning that crippled his ability to address the storm forming between his sons in real time. While his heart may have yearned to bridge the divide, his instincts pushed him towards silence, toward preserving dignity, protocol, and the fragile unity of the crown. The deepening rift between William and Harry called for parental intervention, yet Charles chose not to openly intervene. There were no televised appeals, no heartfelt letters released to the press, no visible moments of reconciliation initiated by the king. Instead, what filtered through the cracks of royal walls were reports of disappointment and quiet frustration. According to palace insiders, Charles was devastated by Harry's decision to step back from royal duties, but he understood the deep pain his youngest son carried. This was not just about abandoning duty, it was about long-festering wounds that had never been allowed to properly heal. When Harry and Meghan announced their departure, Charles attempted a balancing act, supporting his son while reinforcing the institution. The infamous Sandringham Summit in January 2020, where the royal family convened to decide the Sussex's future, reportedly left Charles walking a tightrope. Publicly, he expressed affection, stating that Harry and Meghan would always be much-loved members of my family. Privately, however, aides say Charles was bewildered by Harry's growing willingness to expose royal family dynamics to the world. He allegedly saw the Oprah interview not only as a betrayal but as an irreversible step toward dismantling the royal family's carefully cultivated mystique. Charles's silence was strategic. Unlike Diana, who had used interviews and books to voice her truth, or Harry, who weaponized his pen in spare, Charles understood the power of ambiguity. To him, preserving the dignity of the monarchy meant letting the waves crash without acknowledging each one. Speaking out, especially in defense of one son over another, risked unraveling the monarchy's internal cohesion. Worse, it would have opened him up to further criticism from both sides. But this silence came with a price. To Harry, it became emblematic of a lifetime of emotional absence. In his memoir, Harry lamented the lack of warmth in his upbringing. He described his father as a man who struggled with expressions of love, someone who would occasionally pat him on the knee or offer an awkward joke in lieu of open affection. There were no stories of long conversations or meaningful heart-to-hearts. For Harry, the silence in the wake of his most vulnerable disclosures about mental health, institutional racism, and feelings of abandonment felt like a continuation of a lifelong pattern. To William, on the other hand, Charles's refusal to take a firmer stand may have appeared as a lack of solidarity. As the heir to the throne and the presumed guardian of tradition, William found himself burdened with not only the weight of his duties but the emotional fallout of a splintered family. Charles's reluctance to call out Harry's more controversial revelations, particularly allegations implicating the family, left William exposed. He was left to shoulder not just the public scrutiny but the role of protector, all without a father figure visibly defending him. There were moments, though, where Charles showed flickers of emotional awareness. On his 70th birthday, a documentary crew followed him as he interacted with his grandchildren and reflected on his relationship with his sons. He spoke of missing the closeness he once had with them and expressed a desire for a more united future. But these moments were rare, and they were wrapped in the language of royal ambiguity. There was always a sense that Charles, even in his vulnerability, was speaking through a veil of diplomacy. His accession to the throne following Queen Elizabeth's death only complicated matters. As king, Charles was expected to be above reproach, a unifying symbol in an increasingly divided country. The expectations of kingship clashed with the realities of fatherhood. Every move was scrutinized. Would he invite Harry to the coronation? Would he include Meghan? What message would his decisions send about forgiveness and inclusion? In the end, Harry did attend, but Meghan stayed behind in California. The brief, stiff interaction between father and son during the coronation ceremony said more in its awkward silence than any prepared speech could. Even Charles's recent cancer diagnosis was seen through the lens of familial tension. When news broke of his health struggles, there was a brief, hopeful moment, a possibility that the shared vulnerability might bridge the divide. Harry flew to London, and for a day or two, speculation swirled about a potential reconciliation. But reports later confirmed that the meeting between father and son was short, formal, and devoid of any deep emotional exchange. No tea at Clarence's house. No walks in the garden. Just a quick visit before Harry returned to California. It was a sobering reminder that emotional wounds take more than moments of crisis to heal. This pattern of a father receding just when his presence might matter most continues to haunt the narrative surrounding King Charles. Supporters argue that his role demands such discretion. They say his silence is a necessary shield against tabloid exploitation and partisan manipulation. They point to his decades-long campaign for environmental reform, his patronage of the arts, his steady hand during royal transitions. But critics see something else, a man whose personal reserve created an emotional vacuum within his family, one that allowed resentment and mistrust to fester. The legacy of Charles's silence will depend on how he navigates the remaining years of his reign. Will he continue to rely on institutional stoicism? Or will he, as some close to him have hoped, embrace a more human approach, one that acknowledges pain, addresses missteps, and fosters healing not only for his sons but for the monarchy itself? At the heart of it all lies a deeply complex man, one who has lived in the shadows of public opinion, been vilified for his personal choices, and crowned late in life with a duty he both yearned for and resented. Charles is not just a father or a king. He is a symbol of transition, a bridge between the reign of Stoic tradition and the demands of a more emotionally literate age. Whether he will rise to meet that moment or retreat into the comfort of regal aloofness remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that his silence, intentional, practiced, perhaps even necessary, has shaped the royal drama in profound ways. It has left his sons to define their identities without a unifying paternal voice. It has allowed narratives to fester without challenge. And in doing so, it has turned what could have been a family dispute into a public reckoning. For decades, the British monarchy has operated under an unspoken agreement with the public, maintained the illusion of continuity, tradition, and lineage, and in return, retain your place as the symbolic heart of the nation. But in recent months, that illusion has been dangerously close to shattering. A revelation so seismic that it sent tremors through Buckingham Palace, the Parliament, and the media landscape alike emerged quietly, then exploded. The news that Prince William may not be the biological son of King Charles III didn't just challenge a paternity claim, it struck at the very heart of royal legitimacy, lineage, and the delicate architecture of constitutional monarchy. For years, rumors had swirled around the strained relationship between Charles and Princess Diana. Their marriage, once heralded as a fairy tale union, had long since dissolved into a battlefield of infidelities, emotional abandonment, and media manipulation. The world knew of Charles's long-standing affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. The world knew, too, of Diana's eventual affairs, her loneliness, and her confessions to close confidants and in recorded interviews. Among those rumors, one persisted stubbornly. That James Hewitt, a cavalry officer with whom Diana had a well-documented romantic relationship, was not just her lover, but William's biological father. For decades, these whispers were largely dismissed or confined to conspiracy forums and gossip rags. The timelines didn't line up. Officially, Diana didn't meet Hewitt until 2 years after William's birth. Photographic comparisons were dismissed as circumstantial. The royal family refused to dignify the rumors with a response. But beneath the surface, curiosity and suspicion lingered, especially among insiders who witnessed the emotional distance between Charles and William, even when cameras were off. What changed everything wasn't a tabloid leak or a disgruntled ex-royal speaking out. It was a court-mandated DNA test, initiated not by the palace, but by a legal team acting on behalf of an individual with insider access and vested interest in royal succession. Whether the instigator was a whistleblower, a bitter courtier, or a political actor remains unknown. What is known is that the DNA test was ordered quietly, with the utmost secrecy, under the guise of protecting state interests and the integrity of hereditary succession. According to leaked legal documents obtained through anonymous sources and first reported in an explosive exposé by a reputable European outlet, the test results showed an anomaly. William's genetic markers did not match those of King Charles. The results were cross-examined and independently verified. Within the royal household, panic erupted. Damage control meetings were convened in the middle of the night. Crisis communication teams were activated. Trusted members of Parliament were briefed confidentially. And behind the gilded doors of Clarence House, the unthinkable was being acknowledged in hushed tones. The man next in line to the throne might not be Charles's blood heir. To understand the gravity of this revelation, one must appreciate how deeply entwined bloodlines are with the British monarchy's very existence. Unlike elected officials, monarchs derive their power from an ancestral claim. The entire foundation of royal authority rests on legitimacy by birth. If William is not Charles's biological son, then his claim to the throne, though legally secured by birthright and Parliament, becomes morally and symbolically void in the eyes of tradition. It also raises a chilling constitutional dilemma. Does the monarchy lose its legitimacy if the line of succession is biologically broken? The implications didn't stop there. Once the leak reached international outlets, it triggered an avalanche of reactions. Social media erupted with hashtags questioning William's legitimacy. Late-night television hosts, traditionally deferential to royals, took aim with barbed jokes. Meanwhile, Parliament held closed-door discussions regarding the constitutional ramifications. Could a DNA test undo a royal birth certificate? Could hereditary succession be revoked without creating a constitutional crisis? Could Parliament or the Crown override tradition for the sake of preserving unity? Within the royal family, the revelation set off emotional shockwaves. Prince William, known for his composure, was reportedly devastated. Friends close to the Prince of Wales disclosed that he felt betrayed, humiliated, and broken. To have one's entire identity, one's place in history, called into question is more than an existential crisis. It is a stripping of selfhood. William had dedicated his life to the role he believed was his destiny. He had shaped every decision, every sacrifice, around the future crown. Now, all of it hung in limbo, subject to public scrutiny and private despair. King Charles, on the other hand, was eerily quiet. Once again, the king refrained from making any official statement. Palace aides confirmed that he held meetings with senior advisors, but no direct denial or confirmation came from the monarch himself. Insiders claimed Charles was emotionally gutted. but torn between maintaining dignity and confronting what might be a scandal so vast it could permanently damage the monarchy. Some interpreted his silence as implicit acceptance. Others believed he still harbored doubts about the validity of the DNA results and demanded further testing. Queen Camilla, fiercely protective of Charles and her place in the royal pecking order, reportedly erupted in pride. Sources say she viewed the situation not only as an attack on Charles's legacy but as a direct threat to her family's future. With William's legitimacy questioned, would that make way for Harry, estranged and outspoken, to inherit the throne? Or worse, would it trigger a broader Republican movement in the UK, causing citizens to question the necessity of a monarchy altogether? Amidst all this uncertainty, the public's response was deeply divided. Some rallied behind William, arguing that biology alone should not dictate leadership, especially when he had served with dignity and a sense of duty. Others saw the revelation as final proof that the monarchy was an outdated institution clinging to illusions. Petitions began circulating to open a public inquiry into royal succession laws. Members of the Commonwealth started re-evaluating their symbolic allegiance to the crown. For William, this period became a crucible. Already burdened with the disintegration of his relationship with Harry and the emotional fallout from losing his grandmother and father figure, Queen Elizabeth II, he now faced the erasure of his own legitimacy. Public appearances became rare. His speeches were noticeably shorter, less optimistic. Behind the scenes, friends described a man spiraling inward, questioning every aspect of his life. Was his childhood a lie? Had Charles known? Had Diana, in her efforts to shield him from palace trauma, ever prepared him for this possibility? The psychological toll was not limited to William. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, William's children, were also pulled into the vortex of speculation. If their father's lineage was in doubt, what of theirs? Would they grow up to inherit titles and responsibilities that the public no longer respected? Kate, usually a pillar of discretion and grace, reportedly grew increasingly protective of her children, tightening her inner circle and withdrawing from public events. Meanwhile, the press began hunting for confirmation from James Hewitt. The former cavalry officer, now living a reclusive life in the countryside, had long denied any involvement in William's paternity. Yet the resurgence of speculation brought renewed attention. Paparazzi staked out his property. Journalists pored over old interviews. Some experts insisted that Diana and Hewitt had met too late for him to be William's father, while others raised doubts about the accuracy of public timelines, pointing to inconsistencies in dates and secret rendezvous previously undisclosed. Adding yet another layer to the unfolding crisis, a second DNA test was allegedly commissioned, this time privately, without court involvement. Sources suggest that it was arranged by a senior royal ally seeking definitive answers away from public scrutiny. The results of this test, however, have never been disclosed. Whether they corroborated the initial findings or contradicted them remains one of the most guarded secrets within the palace walls. But the very existence of a second test confirmed what many feared, that the family was no longer sure of its own history. In the wake of these developments, the monarchy finds itself at a crossroads. Should it uphold tradition for the sake of stability, or confront uncomfortable truths in pursuit of transparency? If it chooses the former, it risks losing credibility in a world increasingly skeptical of hereditary power. If it chooses the latter, it invites a chaos that could undo centuries of structure and order. This DNA revelation has changed everything. The royal family, once seen as an immovable institution insulated by centuries of power and pageantry, now stands exposed. The crown is not just a symbol of duty and heritage, it is a symbol of belief. And belief, once shaken, is difficult to restore. In the echoing corridors of Kensington Palace, where history is carved into every stone and portraits of ancestors loom silently over generations, Prince William found himself gripped by a storm unlike any he had ever prepared for. This was not a military operation like the ones he trained for in the RAF, nor a diplomatic event staged with the elegance of polished royal tradition. This was a deeply personal, deeply destructive revelation that undermined not just his future, but the very foundation of who he believed himself to be. For Prince William, the DNA revelation was more than a scandal. It was a crisis of identity, duty, and legacy, one that cracked the core of his existence. When the results were first whispered to him, it wasn't through a grand announcement or a formal letter. It was a quiet conversation, reportedly held in one of the private rooms of Windsor Castle, attended by only a few of the highest-ranking aides and a trusted physician. The setting was intimate, but the atmosphere was tense and frigid. According to insiders, William received the news with a silence so heavy that it made those present uncertain if he had truly absorbed the words. "There's been a mistake," he allegedly said at first, almost in a whisper. "There must be." But as the explanations continued, data reviewed, tests verified, legal protocols followed, the denial gave way to disbelief, then numbness. Witnesses recall that he didn't shout, didn't cry. He simply stood up and walked out of the room, not to be seen again for several hours. When he did emerge, it was into a world that now felt unrecognizable. Prince William had lived his entire life with one defining narrative: that he was born to be king. Every moment since his earliest years had been conditioned by that single, irreversible truth. His education, his training, even his marriage, all carefully considered, calculated, and executed under the weight of royal expectation. He had given speeches to heads of state, walked in the wake of national mourning, and accepted that he would one day wear the crown not as a prize, but as a responsibility etched into his very DNA. And now, with that DNA in question, so too was everything else. Those closest to him described the days following the revelation as dark and disorienting. He reportedly isolated himself from public engagements, canceled private meetings, and even requested that all non-essential communications be filtered through his private secretary. It was not grief in the conventional sense, but something far deeper and more existential. He was mourning the loss of certainty, the certainty of who he was, what he stood for, and why the world had treated him as a future sovereign. According to royal insiders, William began rereading old letters from Diana, some of which he had preserved in a locked drawer in his personal quarters. He went back to her interviews, her public speeches, and even private tapes that she had made, searching for clues, for signs, for anything that might suggest she had tried to prepare him for this possibility. The more he looked, the more conflicted he became. There were passages where she spoke cryptically about protecting her sons from harsh truths. There were references to betrayal, to broken trust, to secrets that must remain hidden for their safety. But there was no definitive answer, no confession that could either confirm or dispel the truth of the DNA results. Kate, the Princess of Wales, became his only anchor in this moment of disarray. But even she, for all her composure and inner strength, was reportedly shaken by the implications. Their marriage had been built not just on love, but on the understanding that they were partners in a mission greater than themselves, a mission to modernize the monarchy, to protect its future, to raise their children in its light. Now that mission was in limbo. Conversations between them reportedly turned long, quiet, and repetitive, circling the same questions over and over. What does this mean for our children? Should we fight it? Should we leave it alone? The strain began to show in public. In one rare appearance days after the scandal broke, William looked uncharacteristically gaunt and withdrawn. Observers noted that he avoided eye contact, gave terse responses, and refused to answer questions posed by journalists shouting outside the venue. His usual grace had given way to a mechanical sense of obligation, as if he were fulfilling his duties merely out of muscle memory, not conviction. Behind closed doors, he faced pressure from all sides. Senior royal advisors urged him to issue a statement denying the allegations, or at least expressing skepticism about the DNA test's legitimacy. They wanted a unified front, a line of continuity that could be presented to the public. But William refused. Sources close to him say he did not want to lie, not to himself, and certainly not to the people.